Part 1. Laying the Foundation. A high-level look. Operating with little information. The language services industry is huge and encompasses many different types of LSPs, so it is impossible to get too deep into specifics while still having a discussion that is relevant to everybody. Another reason why we can't get too specific is because there just isn't enough information out there. When we start discussing what we don't know about the industry, a pessimistic person, like Tucker, may point to this lack of information and see risk, but those with a more optimistic disposition, like Renato, will see nothing but opportunity. Regardless of how you see it, though, it is undeniably important to at least recognize the inadequacy of available information about the industry, because this allows you to proceed with a certain degree of caution. Regardless of whether you are a freshly graduated CLP looking for your first client, or the CEO of an MMLSP and just closed a multi-year contract with God himself, a certain degree of humility and caution would be taken as you navigate the market and work to carve out your own niche in the industry. Before getting further into the general theory of the translation company with the market influencers evaluation, let's take a quick moment to look at some of the factors that are limiting the quality and quantity of information available. Lack of outsider analysis. Let's face it, very few people actually know anything about the language services industry except for those of us in it. Business analysts are no different. They either simply give up because they have no idea how to measure it, or try to force it into the same standards as other industries, which sometimes just don't apply to the language services industry. This means that the language services industry isn't covered well enough by analysts and reporters. So, many of the normal channels that people would use to get information about an unfamiliar industry just aren't available. At the time of writing this, just a handful of publications and advisory agencies are attempting to meet this demand, but their efforts could not possibly suffice to provide the level of information that one has come to expect from, for example, the tech industry or the automotive industry. There is a catch-22 at play here. Nobody reports on the industry because it is not well understood, and it is not well understood because nobody has taken the time to report on it. What this means is that the only people who are reporting on it are those from the industry, since they are the ones who understand it properly, and this can be problematic for two reasons. First, playing nice to avoid controversy. Industry insiders are often reluctant to be critical of other players in the industry for fear of rocking the boat too much. This means that critical thinking and skepticisms are often thrown out the window in favor of recycled headlines and flattering commentary. Recycled headlines are popular because they don't have to be risky or controversial. Flattering commentary is favored because it is too risky to make any enemies. Ultimately, though, there is a deficit of any meaningful or actionable new information or insight into the language services industry. Second, existing in the echo chamber. We industry insiders have, over time, created a positive feedback loop, an echo chamber of sorts. This loop has led us to believe everything that we hear. In the absence of contrary opinions, we have lost the ability to think critically about our industry. You would be hard-pressed to get too many industry insiders to admit it in mixed company, but this lack of outside analysis is a serious threat. The resulting groupthink compromises the credibility of the industry and serves to limit both the amount and quality of information available on the industry even further. Lack of publicly available information. When analyzing any industry or market, one of the most useful sources of information is the financial reports from publicly traded companies. In the language services industry, too, some of the most valuable data we have is from the annual reports submitted by MMLSPs and other publicly traded companies. However, these financial reports are few and far between because the reality is that there aren't a whole lot of publicly traded LSPs. The language services industry is so fragmented that small firms vastly outnumber large ones, and these small firms are less likely to be public or publish their financial data. Financial reports may be interesting academically, but are not very useful to many LSPs unless they are directly competing in the same niche. For example, finding out that one of the largest MMLSPs is operating with a 25% operational margin may be interesting to learn, but this information is not going to be life-changing for most LSPs because they are operating in completely different niches, and so it is not an apples-to-apples comparison. On top of this, it is necessary to keep in mind that LSPs operating in different countries are subject to different financial reporting requirements. We weren't big enough or interesting enough. In the language services industry, the companies that actually are publicly traded haven't been very interesting to people outside the industry. This is not just because they do not provide an apples-to-apples comparison to other LSPs, but also because the vast majority of people in the world don't know or care about language services. This is changing. People are starting to become interested, and many of them will buy this book to learn more. But historically, there has not been demand from the general public to report widely on the language services industry. Top MMLSPs in the industry do business in the hundreds of millions, employing thousands of people around the world. Compare this to the top companies in other industries who do business in the billions and employ hundreds of thousands of people. Why would the New York Times even bother reporting on some no-name $2 million LSP when Apple, Google, and Microsoft are valued in the billions and Amazon is sending people to Mars? The mainstream news covering an LSP would be like sending Anderson Cooper to report on whether Punxsutawney Phil saw his shadow last February. Dynamic nature of the industry. The language services industry is incredibly turbulent. It is constantly changing in size, structure, processes, and practices. Just about the time somebody figures out how to manage and analyze data around any aspect of localization, everything changes and is back to the drawing board. Even if we were able to report consistently year over year, it is hard to track any trends year over year because the yardsticks, or meter sticks, we suppose, for our international readers, we use to measure the industry are themselves being reevaluated and updated. In the introduction, we claim that one of the goals of this book is to respond to a demand we have perceived for information. There is a great need for up-to-date information about the latest changes and trends in the industry. However, it is not the goal of this book to discuss the latest and greatest trends in the industry. Such discussions are better assigned to periodicals and online sources because they require a greater deal of flexibility than the paperback printed format will allow. This book discusses the macro trends in an industry and, more importantly, provides a framework for discussions about the faster-moving micro-trends. We will not measure the moving target for you, but rather give you the tools and training to measure it yourself. Number of players in the industry. There are a ton of players in the language services industry, which makes it somewhat hard to study and report on. If you want to follow the tech industry, you basically have to watch the big dogs. Think Apple, Microsoft, Google, Tesla, Amazon, etc. And the up-and-comers, of course, too. The latter are usually easier to identify because they are generally the latest vanity projects of some C-level executive leaving one of the big dog companies. Now let's compare that to language services. Most industry outsiders couldn't even name one of the top 3 largest LSPs in the industry. Hell, a lot of people who are in the industry can't even name the top 3 LSPs. This is because the largest LSPs really aren't that large. The industry is fragmented. Really fragmented. There are so many companies operating in the industry that reporting becomes problematic. Reporting on all of them is impossible because there are just too many. Reporting on one of them is inadequate because even the top players are not large enough to command any significant market influence by themselves. Compare this to the laptop manufacturing industry, for example, where the top 6 laptop manufacturers make up a whopping 85% of the industry. If you are a business blogger, do you really think you are going to put the effort into learning about the thousands of LSPs in the industry just so that you can write an article about something that, as we already established in the previous section, nobody even cares about? No wonder the language services industry doesn't get reported on. There are simply too many players to follow. Planning with low information. As you can see, we have a problem here. It seems that there are so many missing pieces to the puzzle that we couldn't possibly move forward with any meaningful discussion on the industry. We recognize this problem, and you can believe us when we say that we are just as frustrated as you. So frustrated, in fact, that we chose to write a book about it. We spend the remainder of our time here trying to build upon what we know and how to identify opportunities in the areas where we have incomplete information. What this means for you is that there is a tremendous opportunity. When an industry is saturated with information, it becomes saturated with new players that, in turn, saturate it with ideas. This means there would be no new opportunity for new entrants to break in with unique new services, or for existing companies to expand. Think about it. Where information is lacking, there is still opportunity to create something new and original. Easy for you to say, you may be thinking, but actually this is what we are doing ourselves. Rather than complaining about the lack of quality information in the language services industry, we are seizing the opportunity and writing this book to meet an unmet demand. With the information in this book, you can confidently go out and seize your opportunity. The lack of information available on the language services industry is the reason why market influencer evaluation takes such a critical place in the general theory of the translation company. The evaluation empowers us to analyze not only the industry as a whole, as we have done so far in this section, but our specific niche in the industry and how specific market influencers work to influence an LSP's ability to add value and make a profit.